Hello, it's Father Rich coming to you from the first floor guest room, sitting room at the rectory at Our Lady of Peace. And here for our next essay in our series of how the church has changed the world. I'm here before this image of Our Lady of Fatima, where she appeared, remember, to the three children, Jacinta, Francesco, and Lucia. And I mentioned one of the videos a while ago, this great movie that's been made of Fatima that I would encourage you to go check out. But we know one of the main messages of Our Lady of Fatima was this call for people to pray the Rosary. And this was back in 1917 at the end of World War I. And don't forget the connection with us that Our Lady of Peace is at the end of that war, when it finally came to a close. And that the Pope at the time, Benedict XV, had asked for an image of Our Lady Queen of Peace to be made in Rome. And we have a copy of that in the school, and it really is kind of what our name is based on. We say Our Lady of Peace, but it was typically and probably more traditionally known as Our Lady Queen of Peace. And interestingly enough, that battle of World War I, that saw the most people killed previous to that moment of World War I, where we saw such death and devastation on a world level. Prior to that war in 1917 and 1918, the most death that was seen in a battle in one day was back in 1571. And I just read an article that says 10 dates that every Catholic should know. And among them was that war, that battle. It's called the Battle of Lepanto. It took place in the Mediterranean Sea on October 7th, 1571. And it was praying the Rosary that not only had Pope St. Pius V, who was the Pope at that time, who was really unique. He was a very holy Pope, a Dominican, only a Pope for 6 years, and yet he had an amazing impact, and obviously he was canonized a saint. But he was such a difference to the Renaissance popes that we know, if you know the history, were not holy and were very worldly and got caught up in worldly things politically and in money, and we know promiscuity and all kinds of stuff. So he was a change from that, kind of part of this. Remember, that was right during the counter-Catholic Reformation to the Protestant Reformation. And really a man that he appointed to be the head of the fleet of what had been called the Holy League. But one of the things, amidst the many things that he did, he created a new catechism, a new missal and breviary for the church and for the Mass. He worked with St. Charles Borromeo to renew, and we've talked about this before, to renew the priest, the clergy, who had become somewhat corrupt and soft. And he was the one who excommunicated Elizabeth I, Queen Elizabeth of England. But in the midst of all those things, the author of this essay suggests that the greatest thing he did was to form the Holy League, which was a combination of the Spanish and some of the Italian, several of the different Italian at the time. They weren't one country of Italy, but the Venetians, from Venice and Genoa and different areas, that got them to come together in one force to seek to combat the Ottoman Empire, which continued to grow. The Ottoman Empire in the 1500s was really at its height. It had taken over much of really Eastern Europe and the Balkans, Northern Africa, all the way down into the Persian Gulf. And so really it had taken over most of the Mediterranean. And they really had the naval advantage and superiority. And so here, Pope Pius V is dealing with Protestantism and Islam, and he says, I'm going to raise up a crusade to repel the Muslims from taking over all of Europe. And that battle was hugely significant. They really talked about Don Juan of Austria, which there's a book written about him, Louis de Waal. I may have mentioned him before. He's one of my favorite Catholic authors. He writes this historical fiction books about the saints and other key figures. This is Don Juan of Austria. He was an illegitimate son and brother of King Philip of Spain, and he would be a very holy man, he's not a saint, but he was a pretty devoted man, and he would be named at the age of 24 to lead this this naval fleet of this Holy League, and everybody thought that was crazy, and yet he led them to victory. He was very spiritually committed. They had priests on every boat, and not to say this was there wasn't corruption in this, but they had the whole fleet play the Rosary the night before the battle. And Pope Pius V talked about his fasting and prayer that he was committed to. In the essay, they talk about how the servants would bring food into him and he wouldn't even eat because he was praying and fasting in these days leading up to this battle. It took place in the eastern part of the Mediterranean over by Greece. And one of the things they say that right before the battle started, the wind shifted 180 degrees and created a whole, instead of a disadvantage for the Christian fleet, they took the place of advantage, and they ended up kind of winning the battle in a rout, and really from that day forward, kind of reestablished the Christian strength in the Mediterranean. And after that, we're going to talk about another one of the battles over in the east part of Europe that was significant and kind of leading to the regression out of Europe of the Ottoman Turks. But I don't think, and so when they say that St. Pius V, when they went to tell him they won the war, he was already celebrating because he had a premonition as he was having a meeting with the cardinals that they had won victory. He had seen a vision of Mary. So really a holy man. I've underestimated him, I think, a little bit. And talking about just the impact that he had and this battle had. And so he named October 7th, if you remember, is still to this day the Our Lady of the Rosary. And every Catholics have continued to be encouraged to pray the Rosary in the month of October. We call traditionally the month of the Rosary. A prayer that's underestimated, one that we should recommit to, and 300 years later, 350 years later, Mary sang, pray the Rosary, pray the Rosary. And again, that led to the end of World War I. I think we underestimate the power of prayer, the power of Mary and devotion, and certainly St. Pope Pius V knew what that was about, and other holy men like Juan of Austria. So we're thankful for the ways that they stood up. And I'm listening to a book on tape right now about D-Day, and the way that the Allies stood up and there reclaimed Europe against an evil regime of the Germans, and we kind of see that. But in political correctness says we don't call the Muslims and those battles back in those days politically or battles of good versus evil, but you hear how they approached war and their utter disregard, their barbaric ways of treating their prisoners and raping and pillaging. Not that the Christians were perfect, but there was something more on the line than just a political situation. I do believe there were spiritual elements, and that's something that we have to remember. And not that it's about us conquering the people, the Muslim people and the people of the faith of Islam. We have to figure out ways to dialogue. But certainly, if Christianity is lived out in its best way, to see that that's a fuller way for us to live humanly than if the faith of Islam is lived out, if you look at those two. And so, yes, a huge moment, a huge chapter in our world history, and changed really the format of Europe and Asia forever. And so we're grateful for that. We continue to pray the Rosary, that the good, wherever it is, can continue to win over evil, and that Christianity should and can be part of that and needs to be part of that. And so we pray for that. Thanks for joining me today. Have a great day, and God bless.